Washington Journal continues.
And we're back with Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican of Wisconsin, sits on the Budget Committee and has began a lawsuit against the Obama administration for the Affordable Care Act. 38 other GOP lawmakers have signed on. I want to talk about that. We will get to it. But you are on the Foreign Relations Committee as well. So let's start with Ukraine and this latest round of sanctions, the fourth round. Is it enough?
Probably not, but sanctions are going to be very difficult to have any effect anyway. It's very difficult to target sanctions that don't also hurt Western interests as well. So as a result, you're never going to have Europeans signing on to real strong sanctions, and quite honestly, they can kick back at America as well. So I think what you need to do in Eastern Europe and Ukraine is you need to have a more robust strategic response. First of all, recognizing what gives Vladimir Putin his strength. It's his oil wealth, it's oil reserves, and then, of course, Europe and Ukraine's dependence on those oil reserves. So you have to bust up that monopoly in terms of the supply. I come from the private sector. The customer really ought to be in control of the situation, but here we have the supplier in control. So the way you put the customer in control is we have to open up world energy markets, and probably the single greatest strategic move the U.S. could make is open up our exports of things like LNG. Let's approve all the permits for these LNG terminals. Let's stop flaring so much of our natural gas because we don't even have enough demand for it here in the U.S. We have to capture that so we're not wasting it, and let's make that available to Europe. That's, I think, probably the single greatest long-term strategic move we can make. But then, let's face it, Vladimir Putin is massing tens of thousands of troops on the eastern border. He's got his agents in eastern Ukraine already. You've already got a mini invasion. We also need to show some military, certainly training exercises, far greater military strength. He's amassing tens of thousands of troops. We're sending us a couple hundred. It's simply not. I'm not recommending tens of thousands, but we certainly should be supplying Ukraine with some defensive weaponry so they can actually defend themselves.
So you think we should be arming the Ukrainians?
Absolutely. I mean, here you've got people that show the courage to try and rid themselves of corrupt governments, which really is a holdover from, their Soviet domination 20 years ago. And you've got people rising up the streets showing a great deal of courage, being slaughtered by, basically a Soviet-backed government. And when they're now asking to be able to defend themselves, their military was howled out by the former regime. The least we can do is provide them some pretty effective defensive arms.
What do you say, though, to those that were polled by USA Today that said sanction Russia but don't arm Ukraine? That is what they found out in this poll.
Yeah, I disagree. Sanctions, I don't believe, are ever going to work because we'll never have a unified regime of sanctions that are going to have enough teeth where it doesn't hurt Western interests as bad. And so we'll never have the types of sanctions. You need sanctions in types of countries that can't bite back. Sanctions work good, I think, in North Korea, potentially Iran. I think it's much more difficult against an economy as large as Russia, where there's so many interdependencies. So, again, nobody's calling for U.S. or NATO combat troops on the ground to engage. But what we are talking about is providing some pretty good defensive weaponry, things like anti-tank weapons, that type of thing, to change Putin's calculus so that he doesn't mass a full-fledged invasion. Give the Ukrainian people a chance to stabilize their government, stabilize their country.
I also want to ask you about what Secretary of State John Kerry said about the Mideast peace process. Your colleague, Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican of Texas, came to the floor yesterday and said that Kerry should step down for saying that Israel risks an apartheid state.
Well, the comment was obviously unfortunate is probably the best word you can put on it. But I think what it also does, it basically betrays what I've always felt is an attitude on the left to blame Israel first. Now, I do not see how you can achieve peace in the Middle East until the Palestinians actually recognize Israel's right to exist. So until we get that concession out of the Palestinians, I think all of these peace negotiations, I just don't see how they're going to ever bear fruit. I think it's really unfortunate. But again, obviously, Israel's not an apartheid state. It was really a stupid comment.
So should he step down, as Senator Ted Cruz has said?
Listen, that's up to President Obama to decide whether that comment so marginalizes Secretary of State that he's just no longer an effective spokesperson or a member of the administration. But that's really President Obama's call.
Let's move on to the Affordable Care Act, because you have sued over this. What's your lawsuit?
Well, it's really a lawsuit designed to highlight this administration's unlawful, unconstitutional executive orders. Basically, a method of governing that is strictly unilateral. And specifically, it's one regulation that President Obama enacted through the Office of Personnel Management. Again, he has no legal authority to change the law this way, but this is the regulation that grants members of Congress the tax-preferred contribution into their health care plans that they buy through the exchange. Now, granted, millions of Americans are losing their health care because of Obamacare. Millions are, including members of Congress and their staff. But we're the only small group of Americans that get the special tax-preferred treatment of an employer contribution. That's unfair. It should be reversed. And like I say, oh, by the way, President Obama had no legal authority to change the law that way. No, there's nothing in the Constitution that grants the president the ability to enact, amend, or repeal laws. And yet that's exactly what President Obama is doing dozens of times, not only with the Affordable Care Act, but basically trying to enact his cap and trade policies, even though Congress refuses to do so. So this president is out of control in terms of extra constitutional types of actions that he's taking. And this case is really meant, hopefully, can be a landmark case to highlight and bring back into balance our checks and balances here with the three branches of government.
How do you get your health care?
I actually went to Wisconsin, just bought it in private market. So I'm taking no employer contribution, and it's just my wife and I just have a family policy that we bought right in Wisconsin.
The Justice Department responded to this lawsuit, and this is what they said. The fact that the plaintiffs are or may be eligible for health coverage benefits under OPM's regulation is not enough by itself to establish standing to challenge the regulations. To establish standing, the plaintiffs would have to show that the challenged regulations harm them in a material way, such as by diminishing their health benefits. So you, because you've bought in the private marketplace, are not personally directly impacted or hurt by this regulation.
No, but there are three specific harms that we do claim. First and foremost, I am being forced, to engage in basically a scheme that I believe is unlawful. It does create an administrative burden, and then there is a standing issue that John Boehner got in terms of congressional pay that basically showed it was harmful to a member of Congress when he's getting unequal treatment or something that he didn't, that was being imposed on him that basically created a wedge between himself and his constituents. So there's three specific harms that we are claiming. But again, that's getting to the legalisms of the case. This is about something far more important than that. And then, of course, that's what President Obama is doing right now, is you've got an executive that is engaged in all this executive activity where nobody can show specific harm. One of the amicus briefs filed said, listen, if we take this to its logical conclusion, a president could, for example, come in and basically cut everybody's taxes in half. It harms nobody. Now, I don't think anybody believes that the president has that authority, but that's exactly what the president's doing time and time again, amending, changing, suspending all these aspects of Obamacare, but also, failing to enforce immigration laws, like I say, trying to enact cap and trade when Congress refuses, specifically refuses to enact it into law. So that's really what's at heart of this case. And Jonathan Turley, a law professor at here in Washington, gave powerful testimony to the House Judiciary Committee, basically saying that President Obama has crossed the line, that we are at a constitutional crisis, and we have to have judicial review of this unilateral governance by this president.
How do you plan to pay for this lawsuit?
Well, I was went through Senate ethics. I was given two choices: either pay for it personally or through my campaign funds. And I was willing to actually do it personally, but being able to raise money through my campaign, I can do it that way. I think Senate ethics, quite honestly, didn't think anybody would be crazy enough to either pay for it personally or even utilize campaign funds, which are hard to raise. But I think this is such an important constitutional issue, I was more than willing to do so.
Well, your colleague from Wisconsin, Republican Congressman Jim Sensenbrenner, who was chairman of the Judiciary Committee for a long time, has urged you to not proceed with the suit, saying it was, this is in the Washington Post, a fruitless attempt to stop the law. He apparently called it a frivolous lawsuit and an unfortunate political stunt.
Well, he came out with that press release before I ever filed the suit. And Congressman Sensenbrenner made a lot of noise in a couple of days, but then he found out really the public popularity of exactly what I was trying to do. And I think hopefully now he understands it's not just about this narrow regulation on the special treatment. It's really more about the overall constitutional issue, which is why I got 12 senators, 38 House Republicans to join in that lawsuit. And by the way, we're going to be issuing a letter to all my colleagues that went out this morning encouraging every Republican, every Democrat in the Congress to stand up for congressional power, to push back on this executive. This is a unique moment in history. We have an opportunity with this lawsuit to try and reclaim the power that Congress has lost over the decades that really threaten our freedom, really threaten our constitutional form of government.
The RNC getting behind your lawsuit as well. Ed O'Keefe's piece in the Washington Post notes this, that you are using your campaign account to help raise funds for the suit, a move that will likely help you identify new financial donors for your 2016 re-election, which is expected to be an uphill climb since Wisconsin usually leans Democratic in presidential election years. So is this about your re-election?
No, absolutely not. And let's face it, it hurts me to have to use, and from the standpoint of election and raising money, to have to use those funds because there's limits on how much people can give. And so if I take those funds that are given to my re-election and use those for a lawsuit, those are funds that aren't available for my re-election. So no, this isn't a campaign strategy by any means. This is a deeply held belief that I have that we are losing our very delicate constitutional balance, and is an issue that must be addressed now. And so no, this is a pretty important issue. This is not frivolous. This is not a stunt. This is a very serious constitutional question.
Okay, well, let's get to viewers who have been waiting. Carol is in Conyers, Georgia, Republican or Democratic caller, excuse me. Hi, Carol, go ahead.
Good morning, Greta.
Morning.
Steve had a show on the other day about, the contents of you all's show. And my thing is that, Greta, if you wanted to have a different view than this man right here, let me see his name again.
Senator Johnson.
Senator Ron Johnson.
Senator Johnson. No disrespect. I don't mean any to you, sir. But the thing is, Greta, if you want to get the truth out of him, you need to have somebody in his same statue sitting in front of him, because he's not being truthful. Because the thing is that he knows that it's a dead dog he's beating with this Affordable Care Act. So all the Republicans want to do is beat a dead horse. But don't let him sit there, Greta, when you know he's lying about using the. If he wanted to use his money, he could have used his money for this fruitless lawsuit that he's got to raise money for his campaign. And you know what, Mr. Johnson, you're going to lose because you have been deceitful. You call President Obama deceitful, but you had, when you was running, you went bankrupt. You made a whole hospital go bankruptcy under you. So you cannot. How about the pot calling the kettle black?
Okay,
so what that be like?
Okay, Carol, let me.
I'm Carol's a supporter.
Yeah, well, let me jump in because there's a lot there to respond
right.
to. But let me respond about C-SPAN. And Carol, I heard that show that you're referring to and what Steve said at the time, and we often try to have roundtable discussions with two members of Congress who have differing views. It doesn't always work out with their schedules, but we have roundtable discussions a lot on this show, and we'll continue to do that. But the other thing, to Carol, that you said is that that the host shouldn't just sit here. Well, the beauty of the program is that you get to call up and challenge members of Congress like Senator Ron Johnson and put your opinion forth. So let me turn to you, Senator, and respond.
Sure. Well, first of all, Greta, whenever I get in front of a bipartisan audience, I generally start the conversation with what we agree on. Same way as I start any business negotiation. And Carol, I hope you agree that we share the same goal. I want a prosperous America. I'm concerned about every American. We all want every American to have the opportunity to build a good life for themselves and their family. Now, I'll be the first to admit that certainly Carol and I probably have different ideas on how to achieve that kind of prosperity, how to make those opportunities available. But we have enormous challenges facing this nation, and I don't think it helps a whole lot to be calling people liars or to be questioning each other's motives. I really do think all of this government is massive. I think it's causing a lot of problems, but I'll admit that most of it is very well intentioned. I think misdirected. I think there's some very serious negative unintended consequences about the size and scope of government. But again, I don't question the other side's motives. I'd appreciate if people didn't question mine, because I really came here to try and solve these problems for every American.
What about the politics of this issue, though? I want you to address that after we show you and our viewers what the Senate Majority Leader had to say. Harry Reid came to the floor, Democrat of Nevada, yesterday, and he talked about Republicans continually going after the Affordable Care Act. Here's what he had to say.
For example, last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that the Republican Party has a newly adopted campaign strategy. To defeat Senate Democrats, they're going to attack me. This is because their attacks and fabrications regarding the Affordable Care Act have borne little fruit. In Senate races across the country, Republicans will avoid the issues that matter most to Americans, instead trying to focus attention on a senator who's not even up for election. That senator is me. And what are those issues that Republicans so desperately want to avoid? How about immigration? That bill was introduced a year ago, and it passed the Senate many, many months ago. It's a good piece of legislation, Mr. President, that the vast majority of the American people think is a good idea. Yet instead of explaining to the American people why this bipartisan bill sits idly in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, they want to change the subject. The Speaker of the House of Representatives refuses to allow a vote. If a vote were allowed to occur, it would pass overwhelmingly. That's a good piece of legislation. Not only is it fair and equitable, but it also would reduce the debt by $1 trillion, Mr. President. While struggling American families plead to Congress for help in providing work or getting paid fair, livable wages, House Republicans prefer to talk about anything but what is relevant. Why? Because their billionaire sugar daddies aren't interested in helping middle-class Americans get a fair shot.
Senator Ron Johnson, the Majority Leader making the argument there that you're focusing on things like the Affordable Care Act or attacking him instead of focusing on issues like immigration.
Well, again, from my standpoint, I'm totally focused on the economy. I think Obamacare is part of the problem. One of those things is keeping our economy from being as robust as it should be. It's hard to even know where to start with Senator Harry Reid there, who's really running, I hate to even say running the Senate. I mean, he's really destroying the Senate. Pretty much a one-man dictatorship. And I mean, even right there, he's accusing us of targeting him, and he's demonizing some billionaires. That's really pretty much the left's tactic, is isolate somebody, demonize them, rather than talk about the real issues. What we need to do in this country is we need to make America an attractive place for risk-taking, for capital investment, for business expansion and job creation. How do you do that, Greta? I think conceptually it's pretty simple. We have to have a competitive tax environment. We need to have a less onerous and competitive regulatory environment. We ought to be utilizing our God-given natural energy resources. You know, if you're going to manufacture things, like I'm a manufacturer background, you need power to make things. They're talking about how do you strengthen the middle class? Well, how about making manufacturing in America more competitive? We're not going to do that, for example, enacting cap-and-trade legislation that will make, as President or candidate Obama said, his cap-and-trade proposals would necessarily cause electricity rates to skyrocket. That's not good for American families. So again, I'm not questioning Harry Reid's motives, but he's always questioning, conservatives' motives, and I just think that's just wrong.
Okay, we'll go to Mike in Rockford, Illinois, independent caller. Hi, Mike.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Thank you for everything. You're definitely a beacon of light, a pillar in the community. Thank you. But my thoughts on the ACA, with the delay of the employer mandate twice, I feel it's a single-payer system. I feel that, say, like a widget company that can back a candidate with unlimited funds, put them in office, that candidate is no longer loyal to the voters but to the company. And now the widget company can also ship the corporate, the manufacturing overseas and write off 100% of expenses overseas. They can hire illegals at the same time, and at the same time they're getting the employer mandate taken off their books, so they have no longer to pay insurance. So if I have a widget company, I'm definitely going straight uphill. I'm wondering what's the employer mandate and when the employer is going to start paying for this health care. And why is a widget company running this country and taking all the power of the vote by unlimited funding of the candidates? The candidates have no loyalty to the voters no more, but to the widget company.
All right, Senator Johnson.
Well, first of all, the employer mandate is something, again, President Obama, without legal authority, has delayed. And the law is very clear that the employer mandate shall be implemented after January or December 31st, 2013. The employer mandate should be in effect, but President Obama didn't come back to Congress to change the law the constitutional way. He just took upon himself through presidential edict and decree to change it. That's really the heart of my lawsuit, is to end that unilateral governance by this president. In terms of companies ruling America, listen, I'm far more concerned about an all-powerful federal government than I am concerned about the influence of thousands of different companies. The reason you should have full disclosure in terms of campaign finance, to disclosure on contributions to candidates, is for the voters to understand who's backing a candidate, then they can make their decision whether or not an individual or elected official is being influenced by people who gave them contributions. I think that kind of transparency is very valid. From my own standpoint, I did self-fund an awful large part of my campaign. The other contributions primarily came from donors in Wisconsin. I'm beholden to nobody. I'm coming here because and I decided to give up a life I love in Oshkosh because we have enormous challenges facing this nation. I'm just doing everything I can to, first and foremost, educate Americans to the extent of the problem, because, Greta, the first step in any problem-solving problem process is admit you have a problem. Then you have to properly define it. We're not at that stage yet. We have politicians saying Social Security is solvent to the year 2033. It's not. We have President Obama say that Medicare just requires modest reforms. Over the next 30 years, Medicare will have a deficit of about $35 trillion, according to our calculations. $35 trillion. That's a program that requires far more than modest reforms. So, all I can speak for is myself, and I'm coming here willing to take tough votes to solve these problems. We just don't have a partner on the other side who's willing to do so.
Kirk is next, a Republican in Gilbertville, Massachusetts. Hi, Kirk.
Yes, hi. Senator, the laws of physics didn't change in 9/11, and the Congress's blind faith of the inherently flawed NIST report on Building 7 has severely stunted America's understanding of what happened that day. Why won't Congress launch an actual criminal investigation into the events of 9/11 and take into account the scientific evidence that demonstrates that explosives were used to take down Building 7 as well as the towers?
Senator Kirk is part of a group that believes that the investigation into 9/11 was not adequate by this government. Organized call-into programs like this to ask members of Congress to take this up. You're serving in your first term, so you weren't around, but do you have any thoughts?
I haven't really looked into, there's so many enormous problems facing this nation. Listen, we need to be incredibly concerned about the security of our nation. We've faced an asymmetric threat. Part of the problem with 9/11 is that, for a decade, Al-Qaeda had declared war on America, and we just didn't want to admit it. And all of a sudden, with 9/11, we realized they really were at war with us. Al-Qaeda is metastasized. We may have gotten and damaged core Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan, but now it's into northern Africa. And
Syria?
Syria? No, and it's metastasized. It's an asymmetric threat. It's very dangerous. As well as much as we'd like to say that Russia's weak, that's a lot of, the administration saying, well, Russia's weak. This proves that Russia's weak. The moves that Vladimir Putin is taking show, from my standpoint, a fair amount of strength, at least strategic strength. And, to say that this is, we're not engaged in a Cold War, well, I think Vladimir Putin is. So my whole point, whether across the board in terms of problem solving, you have to first recognize reality. You have to acknowledge it. And we can't keep our head in the sand about these things.
All right, we'll go to Joseph in California, independent caller. Hey, Joseph, where are you from?
Are you talking to me,
Yep.
Joseph?
Yeah, what's the name of your town?
Visalia.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you now about this is Visalia.
All right, you know what?
Well,
You know what? I'm going to put you on hold, Joseph. You got to turn your television down. That's what's leading to the confusion. We'll go to Rebecca in Hallwood, Virginia, a Republican caller. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello. Mr. Johnson, or Senator Johnson, I was hoping we'd just stay away from Ukraine. Now, isn't it true that they got a very strong man to take care of their Russia, which he wants Ukraine? We know that. But isn't it true that we have a weak president? And the reason that Putin is getting away with what he's getting away with is because he's had years of watching what's going on. and he knows, now that after weeks or years of being weak, it's too late to just all of a sudden we're going to send troops or we're going to send weapons or we're going to do anything. Our best bet is just to stay away and take care of what we can take care of, because we cannot take care of Russia and we cannot take care of China. Okay. And if we go with Russia, we're going to have both of them on us at one time. Thank you.
Senator Johnson?
Well, Rebecca is right that what gives Vladimir Putin strength is our weakness. And so we have to dissipate his strength, but we have to show greater strength, greater resolve. Again, I'm not talking about getting in a shooting match with Russia, but the fact of the matter is that we unilaterally canceled the missile defense shield in Poland and Czech Republic. That was a bad sign. The fact that this president draws red lines and then when they're crossed does nothing about it. What is happening around the world, world leaders, people that depend on the United States because we've entered into defensive treaties with them, they're questioning whether we will honor those treaties. And as a result, they're going to start taking actions. For example, we entered this Budapest memorandum with the UK and Russia to basically assure the border integrity, the sovereignty of Ukraine. And when Russia obviously abrogated their own signature status to that memorandum, nothing's happened. So Russia will continue to do this. And by the way, as will then North Korea, as will Iran, as will China. Other nations will sense the lack of resolve, the lack of strength on the part of America, and they will start expanding. It'll make the world a far more dangerous place. I mean, we see it certainly with China, declaring these flight zones and sovereignty over these islands in the South China Sea. These are very dangerous times. I agree with Ronald Reagan. You achieve peace through strength. If you are weak, it's going to be the exact opposite. So again, I just don't believe America's in a position where we can just hunker down at home, become isolationists, and think nothing's going to happen. Again, we ignored the fact that Al-Qaeda was at war with us. That resulted in the slaughter of thousands of Americans because of really our lack of resolve in that situation.
We're talking with Senator Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin. He sits on the Budget Committee. He's also on the Science and Transportation Committee, Foreign Relations, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, and Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Here's a couple tweets for you on health care. Peg says this: Senator Ron Johnson, is the issue how ACA is implemented or lowering our cost of medical care in this country? She says this debate is tiresome. And then Monty says, what do you propose we do to help the sick and the poor who cannot afford health care? Is proper health care a human right? Mm-hmm.
Well, let's first go to the affordability aspect of it. There were three primary promises of Obamacare. We're going to insure all the uninsured, about 30 million Americans. Best estimates right now of those 8 million people who signed up, 27% were previously uninsured, but only half of those paid the premium. So somewhere between 1 to 2 million previously uninsured Americans are now taking advantage of Obamacare. So we didn't meet that goal. President Obama repeatedly promised that if you enact Obamacare, the cost of a family plan would decline by $2,500 per family. Well, the fact is the cost of health care is up $2,500 per family. Now with the implementation of Obamacare, it's up even probably higher than that. And then his most famous promise, which was labeled the lie of the year, was if you like your health plan or your doctor, you can keep those doctors. And we've witnessed, obviously, Americans lose their health care plan they could afford, that they liked. Access to doctors and treatment kept them alive. So those are just the facts. Listen, I'm tired of the debate. I mean, I wish the health care law would not have been implemented, but we've only seen the tip of the iceberg about in terms of the damaging effect of Obamacare. It is going to reduce the quality of care. It's going to lead to rationing. We're already seeing with the very ill-advised medical device tax, one of the estimates are 33,000 jobs have either not been created or shipped overseas because medical device manufacturers, they're not investing in equipment. So that's kind of the first part of the question. The second part was?
Oh, the second tweet was about, is proper health care a human right? How do you provide health care for the poor?
Listen, we're a very compassionate nation. I think every American agrees that we want a strong social safety net. We didn't have to disrupt the entire health care system, our entire insurance market, to provide that type of safety net. From my standpoint, part of what the Democrats are proposing right now to make health care affordable under Obamacare is now a copper plan, which would be an incredibly high deductible plan. Well, that's probably not a bad way to go in terms of a social safety net. I agree with President Obama. No American should go bankrupt because they get ill. The way you take care of that is with a high deductible, major medical type of plan that is certainly more affordable, and if you can't afford that, that should be the social safety net. You combine that with high-risk pools, you've also taken care of pre-existing conditions.
Well, let's go back to the lawsuit that you filed against the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. What is their role in this, and what have they done that you think hurts the healthcare or delivery of healthcare?
Well, again, it's not hurting it's the fact that President Obama has taken these actions without the constitutional authority to do so. The law was debated very clearly. I think I'd like to repeal the entire law. I think this was a really stupid part of the law that, I don't disagree that members of Congress, when they're debating health care, made the big show saying, hey, this is going to be so great, we're going to take advantage of those health care plans through the exchange ourselves. But then Chuck Grassley offered an amendment and say, okay, well, if we have to buy through the exchange, let's at least let our employer contribution flow to those plans. Let's not deny people employer contributions, which I don't disagree with. As a matter of fact, Republican senators didn't disagree with that. It was the Democrats that voted against that very amendment to allow an employer contribution into those plans purchased through the exchange. I mean, this was debated, it was voted on. That was the will of Congress. Now, I don't agree with that, but that's the law. So President Obama, if he doesn't like that, now of course Senate Democrats hate it, so they went running to President Obama, even though OPM originally ruled, looking at the law, that there should be no employer contribution for members of Congress and their staff purchasing insurance through the exchange. That was OPM's original ruling until Senate Democrats panicked, went to President Obama, asked for relief, and so President Obama said, don't worry, I'll talk to OPM, we'll come up with a rule to circumvent the law unconstitutionally. Again, the Constitution gives the president no power to either enact, amend, or repeal laws, and that's what he's doing. So that's really the heart of this case. It's really not about the health care law. It's about unilateral governance by this president, about presidential power growing incredibly powerful. It's increasing. It's been increasing during my lifetime, but this president has taken it to new levels, and that's according to Jonathan Turley, who's really a supporter of President Obama.
Okay, we'll go back to Joseph in California, independent caller. Joseph, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm back. Okay, Senator Johnson, I'm going to chop you. Building number 7, it was a half a mile away. Tell us American people what brought it down.
Okay, Joseph, we've already addressed that, so we're going to move on. Linda, in Churchville, Maryland, Republican caller. Hi, Linda.
Hi, how are you? Senator Johnson, I want to thank you so much for standing up for the American people. I feel that our country is in a lot of trouble.
Well,
okay, Linda, is that it?
First of all,
yes.
Linda,
okay, go ahead.
Linda, I agree. I really did like my life in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, enjoyed running a manufacturing plant, but certainly as I saw the passage of the health care law, I knew what assault that would be on our freedom, but I also recognize the fact that we are mortgaging our children's future. Greta, today, every American share of the federal debt is $55,000. In 10 years, that'll be $75,000, and when I talk to young people, I always say, well, because you're young, concentrate on that figure 10 years in the future, $75,000, and you better tack on $150,000 for your parents' share, $150,000 for your grandparents' share, because that debt's not going away. You're going to be shouldering that burden. I mean, so I ask my audiences, do you understand what we're doing to future generations, the prosperity, the opportunity we are depriving of them by not admitting we have a problem, not properly diagnosing it, and really doing virtually nothing to address it? I mean, that's what's so frustrating for somebody like me. I've been in office now, more than 3 years, and I haven't taken tough votes to actually solve these problems because we really don't have a willing partner in the White House that is willing to take the political risk with people like myself or Paul Ryan or the Republicans in Congress that want to actually save these programs, save Social Security, save Medicare for future generations.
We'll go to Burke, Virginia. Dean is a Democrat there. Hi, Dean.
Good morning, Greta.
Morning.
First of all, regarding C-SPAN and the way you handle things, in the words of Carly Simon, nobody does it better. Senator Johnson, couple quick questions. The Senate bill on immigration that was passed, do you feel if today the vote was brought up on the floor of Congress, it would pass?
It wouldn't pass in the House, and I voted against it, even though I want to solve the immigration problem. The problem with the Senate version is it was going to spend about $260 billion on welfare benefits to non-U.S. citizens. We can't afford the benefits we've already promised, much less offer more. And even according to CBO, it only stopped 30 to 50% of illegal immigration. So it didn't solve the problem. And it was comprehensive. And that'd be a word that I would just kind of take out of our vocabulary here in Washington, D.C. We don't do comprehensive very well. I think we really need to do, step-by-step approach, starting with securing the border, but by not necessarily militarizing it. What we need to do is we need to eliminate all the incentives for illegal immigration. So you need a functioning legal immigration system. You need a guest worker program. There's a lot of things we could do, but the Senate, bill I just think was misguided. I voted against it, but I immediately went over to the House, working with the people that are serious about immigration reform there, and I hope the House starts passing the individual components step by step. First, border security, then we need to take care of the individuals that are here. They're living in the shadows. That's not humane for any of us. We got to fix that problem, but we have to have a functioning legal immigration system. Dean,
can I go back to you? Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, in regards to health care, don't you feel that before the ACA became law, that health care was a major issue?
Sure. And, and quite honestly, because, again, I was buying health care for the people that worked with me for 31 years at my business, we were actually moving in the right direction. Maybe not quickly enough, but with the passage of things like health savings accounts, which, people like me, in our business, we went to higher deductible plans. We saved a lot in terms of premiums. Now, I didn't pocket that money. What I did is I took those premium savings and I gave those to the employees in their health savings account. In 3 years, every employee at my business had $5,000 in a health savings account. Now, that was their money. So they were going to start spending it more wisely. In other words, we were moving a path of reconnecting the consumer of the product with the payment of the product, bringing the free market discipline to actually control costs, improve quality and customer service. And let me just give you a free market reaction to that. Places like Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, they established walk-in clinics. Now, people aren't going to get all their health care there, but it's not a bad way to triage, to have that first visit. Some primary care, let's say you have a child with potential ear infection. Rather than going to the emergency room where it might cost you $200 or $300, you go into Walgreens and a visit with a nurse practitioner costs about $35. So the free market is a marvel. We need to reintroduce it in a far more robust way in terms of health care. So, no, I mean, our health care system is a long ways from being perfect. But still, in terms of outcomes, it is the best system in the world, and that's at risk right now because of Obamacare.
By the way, on this issue of immigration and what the Speaker had said when he was back in his district during the break, the National Review, the conservative magazine, their editors weigh in on this. Boehner's Tantrum is their piece, talking about the Speaker offering an explanation for why the House has not moved on an immigration bill, saying that some of his Republican colleagues just don't want to do anything that is, quote, too hard. And this is what National Review says. To the extent that Boehner is right, though, the system is working as it should. Fear of political repercussions is keeping congressmen from voting for unwise legislation. The Senate bill is too flawed to be the basis for useful legislation. By legalizing illegal immigrants before we are sure enforcement is working, it runs the risk of drawing in more illegal immigrants in the future. Yeah. What did you make of the Speaker's comments?
Well, again, not the way I would have addressed it. But I think the Speaker's been right in saying one of the real stumbling blocks in terms of passing immigration through the House is, first and foremost, the Senate bill, so flawed. They don't want a conference with a very flawed bill. And also this president's lack of enforcement. Nobody trusts this president to actually enforce a law that the House would pass. So, my guess is we're not going to be able to pass immigration reform through the House while this Senate bill is still alive. And I was always advising Senator McCain and Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio. I appreciated their attempt because I wanted to solve the problem, but my advice was always go to the House, work with House members, get them to pass the components step by step. It had a far better chance of passage rather than try and do a deal with Democrats in the Senate that I always thought would be dead on arrival in the House, and it was dead on arrival.
Back to the lawsuit that you have started here. Don in New Jersey has this email for you. How can Senator Johnson accuse President Obama of overuse of power when the Republicans have used the filibuster more than any other time in history to oppose bills that the president's needed? He calls this hypocrisy.
I'm not sure the exact count because we may have had a few votes on Republican amendments, but I know Leader McConnell talked about early in the year, since July 13th, I believe it was, in the most deliberative body in the world, supposedly, Republicans had 4 votes on amendments. Four of our amendments were actually voted on in the United States Senate. So the problem with the Senate is it's being run by, one-man dictatorship, Harry Reid. We're not utilizing the committee process where you actually can have a discussion with colleagues across the aisle. You can, craft compromises. Harry Reid is putting all these very political bills just dropping on the floor of the Senate. They have no chance of passage. this is inside baseball. He fills the tree, doesn't even allow amendments to be filed, so we can't even vote on any amendments. So this is all political. That's the problem. Harry Reid is not running the Senate to actually pass bipartisan bills. He's using the Senate as a basic political weapon. It's all about politics, and proof of that is the United States Senate hasn't passed an appropriation bill, a prioritized appropriation bill in 2 years. It's the primary function of Congress. Authorize the activity of the federal government and then fund it through these prioritized, hopefully well thought out, well debated appropriation bills. We haven't done that in 2 years. It'll be interesting to see whether we pass any appropriation bills this year before the election.
Before we let you go, up next we're going to be talking about income inequality, the racial wealth gap up next. Minimum wage vote. The Senate expected to vote this week to end debate on a minimum wage bill. What's your stance on that issue?
Well, first of all, even CBO shows that if you increase the minimum wage the way the president's proposing, you will lose 500,000 to 1 million jobs. You're basically taking the bottom rung of the ladder of opportunity away from people. I think that's a really bad idea. The way to increase Americans' wages is to have a robust economy. You go back to my first comments. You have to make America an attractive place. Rather than demonizing businesses, rather than engaging in class warfare, we should celebrate success. We should incentivize business expansion and job creation. We're not doing that in this nation. So these are just, again, very political votes. It's not going to solve the problem. You're not going to increase people's wages. If anything, you're going to reduce the number of jobs available for those entry-level positions that are just crucial for people to, like I say, get on the bottom rung of that ladder of opportunity. Because once you get in business, once you show a business that you are dedicated and you want to contribute to their success, not that many people stay at minimum wage all that long. And really, most really successful businesses, there's particularly in manufacturing, the wage levels are far above minimum wage.
That vote on the minimum wage happening in the Senate. Go to C-SPAN 2 for our coverage. Of course, gavel to gavel on C-SPAN 2 of the Senate. Senator Ron Johnson, thank you for talking to our viewers.
Enjoyed it.
Appreciate the time. Coming up next.